From Hong Kong, this is Mea Culpa, the Lessons Learned from Startups podcast. Based on the Postmodern Conference, where founders, investors, lawyers and mentors share their stories about working on, with or for startups. I'm Jeffrey Brewer, and today we talk to Amit Chatterjee, CEO and founder of Shadow Factory, a B2B virtual, augmented and mixed reality production service company headquartered in Hong Kong. Before that, he was involved in multiple startups. Welcome, Amit.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Amit, tell me, how did you get involved in startups?
I've been doing startups for as long as I can remember. Even when I was a young kid in school, I'd be trying to start clubs with my friends, and we'd try to do different activities and things together. I remember when I was 13 or 14 years old, I had this idea in my head about starting a magazine that was centered around video games and youth culture and all that stuff. And I tried to pitch it to my dad, and I had this whole business plan that I wrote that was terrible. I think I wrote it literally on the back of a napkin and tried to pitch it to him. When I was in college, there was a startup news magazine called Harvard Focus Europe. And I was one of their first staff members for the print and digital edition. So that was one thing that really kind of set me on my path towards startups, because I knew that I always had an itch for it. I didn't really understand why, but I knew that I was excited about being involved in startups. And that's kind of how I got started.
Your background, what was your major?
Oh, so my background is I actually went to university a lot earlier than most folks do. So I started when I was 12 years old, and I graduated when I was 18, and I attended Harvard. And the major I ended up with was political science, and I ended up minoring in mathematics. While I was hanging out, taking some graduate courses, I also did some work in animation, design, and I hung out with the computer science folks, and I just absorbed a lot of different information from different areas. And by the time I was 18, 19, I was looking for a job. It turns out there's not a lot of jobs out there for 18-year-old poli-sci majors. So I ended up helping my parents retire to India, and moved back with them to help them settle down. And I started consulting on different types of projects, and that led me on my path. Yeah.
You said you pitched your father an idea based upon the written on a napkin. Does entrepreneurship run in the family, or?
I think in a way, yes. The spirit of entrepreneurship runs in our family. My parents both are from India. They grew up, in the 60s basically, and by the time the 70s had rolled around, they'd had my brother, and they were on their way to the U.S. to start a life together. They didn't know anybody in America. They were literally just, my dad tells the story, he had $10 in his pocket and just showed up in Boston, with a 1-year-old and my mom. And so the two of them made a life for themselves in the States, and both excelled at what they did. My dad was a career academic, and my mother was a career computer scientist. So she was one of the first database architects out of Boston, and she worked for people like the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Air Force, Fidelity. She's one of the people that was on the Y2K compliance task force that were all around the world, and all that. So she had a really stellar career as a database architect and designer. And my dad had a long-lasting impact as an educator in Massachusetts. Yep.
Do you still know what the idea was that was on that napkin?
Oh, yeah, totally. I remember it. It was literally about all the video games I like to play and all the TV shows that I like to watch, and just doing commentary on that stuff. And my disruptive idea was that instead of it being a print magazine, it was going to be on CD, and I was going to print CDs and send them to people. So
a very early stage version of Stitch?
Something like that. Yep, something like that.
And what was...
More like an early stage version of IGN.
Okay.
The news network. Yep.
And what was the actual feedback that you got from your father in trying to discourage you to do this?
So I had the idea, and I was like, Dad, this is what I want to do. And he was like, okay, if this is what you want to do, how are you going to do it? What do you need? And I was like, oh no, it's going to be really easy. And I listed out, again, I was a teenager. I had no idea what I was doing or talking about. So I just was like, well, what do I need? I probably need a fax machine. So I started writing things down on the back of this napkin. I probably need a fax machine, a computer, maybe a printer. Maybe I can get an all-in-one printer fax machine. And and then like that'll be it, and then like photocopy everything in color. And my dad was like looking at me, and he just started to laugh. And I think at the end of it, the real motivation was I was just trying to get my own phone line for my room. And he was like, "Yeah, no, it's not happening." So I was like, "Okay."
And you needed that phone line to get internet, or?
For internet, phone calls, whatever, you know.
Okay.
Things you do when you're 14, you know.
So at that point, you moved to India. You did some projects.
Yeah, so around 2002, 2003, I moved to India, and I landed on this. Basically, the way I was occupying my time was I had a lot of friends who were back in the States who wanted to do things in India, and they needed help. So I was the guy on the ground for them, and I could help them touch down and get started and launch what they needed to do. So a couple of them were like BPO style tech companies. A couple of them were looking to connect with different types of like merchants and for like cosmetics and like clothing materials, things like that. And then as I was hanging around, I landed on this project where Centennial College from Canada was trying to launch a satellite animation campus in New Delhi. And it needed to be a campus that was equivalent to something that would happen in Canada or their facilities in Canada. And so through a series of misadventures, which is for another podcast, another day, I landed on that project, and the program director who was there from Toronto took a liking to me and hired me as part-time faculty and we worked together to launch this facility. And it was quite a big deal. Like, we got a lot of press in India. This is at the time when, you know, VFX and animation were having a massive boom in India, and a lot of different companies were setting up shop there. Other companies around the world were getting more comfortable sending their IP to India to have it worked on. And I was very lucky to be part of this team where we were doing really great work and training the students that would be the next generation of this industry in India. And our first graduating class had 100% placement throughout the industry in India. And then after we'd had that launch, those of us that were the part-time or contractors on the project, we started getting phone calls from other people that wanted to do similar projects, so other training institutes that were starting to pop up and do similar things. And so I was doing that for a while, and as I was on that circuit, I got a call from a studio in Bombay called Prana Studios, and at the time they were doing work for Disney and DreamWorks and NVIDIA, and they needed some help with their technology operations, and I got recruited to come help them with that. And yeah, that was also a series of adventures as well. So again, wherever I've been the person that gets brought in to help people do new things or to bring life back to things that have been in disarray for a while.
How did you end up in Hong Kong?
So I did my work in India for a bit, and then I ended up back in the US. I ended up working for Scholastic for a while. I ended up running my own startup in animation for a while over there, and then after that shut down, it was 2012, and I was consulting again.
That startup, you said, and
Yep.
animation. What was the premise of that startup?
So the premise was I had just come back from India, having run an animation studio that was doing like world-class work for, you know, Disney and all these other companies. And I was like, well, if we can do it in India, we could probably do it in Boston. So I had just come off of working with Scholastic and another advertising startup called Interscope, later got acquired by Nielsen. And I just couldn't fight this urge that I had to come back to doing this kind of creative work. And so I got some friends together and we started this full service animation studio that was meant to cater to, you know, broadcast television and doing corporate videos and stuff like that for different companies. And we're actually, you know, we had our various challenges, but we were doing okay. I did a really bad job with managing the fundraising and all that on that startup. And so the first few investors that came in got some pretty onerous terms with us, and they enforced them all right after the recession. So whatever money we'd made immediately disappeared on us, and we ended up having to shut down the company. But up to that point, we ran the company for about 2 years, and it was pretty decent. You know, we had a team of about 20 people. We always had an office in downtown Boston. We worked with some interesting clients, like, you know, Hennessy was one of our Hennessy Artistry was one of our clients. The city of Boston was one of our clients. And then we also worked with PayPal as well.
And how come there were some contracts there, or like term sheets probably that gave those investors those right? Didn't you get like legal advice, or was it just
no, because I was 20 something and thought I knew everything, and and had this chip on my shoulder of getting an early start from a place like Harvard, and so you couldn't have thrown good advice at me. And then I had worked at places like Scholastic and all these other companies, and I was like, oh, I really feel like I could do this better, or imagine this structure better, or whatever. And so I had all this baggage I was wearing as a first-time entrepreneur that was like all the things I wanted to correct about previous working experiences. Now, I don't mean to say Scholastic's not a great company. Scholastic's an amazing company to work for, but again, in my mind, in my perspective, and the things that I wanted to do, I was like, oh, because I'm good at multitasking, an entire organization can be good at multitasking, and you don't need to have a separation between CTO, COO, and CFO. That could all be one role, and why would you want to break that up? And I only learned that the hard way as to why those are separate functions through the process of managing my animation studio.
And what was the biggest lessons learned in terms of like a specific term in a condition in a term sheet or something else that you later on said that's
so
not
with the fundraising on that one, for the name of the studio is Black Screen Studios. With the fundraising on that one, when I started, I had no money. I literally had I think $100 left to my name. I just quit my job, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I knew that I really wanted to do this studio, this animation studio, but I needed cash for it, and I don't have any cash. We don't come from any money or anything like that. So I was like, okay, well, how do I do this? And I was talking to some people. I went to the usual places you go, family, friends, that kind of thing. And I got introduced to somebody that was a close friend of the family, and was willing to throw down a little bit of cash. And as an angel investor, he had certain terms and things like that. And basically, I knew that they weren't the ideal terms, but I also knew that if I didn't take a deal like that, I was never going to get started, because I literally had nothing to start with. So I was like, okay, I'll take this deal and see what happens. And it got us started. We got up and running, and that was great. But the payout on that term sheet and the details of it basically entitled him to everything that we had accrued in the bank 2 years later. And so he called me up and was like, this is at the end of 2 years. And again, we were doing well. We were about cash flow positive and about to take off. And he was like, look, I know you're doing well and everything, but all my other investments, again, this is the danger with angel investors, is that if they're not super sophisticated investors, they're throwing money at a lot of different types of projects, and you don't know how they perceive them, or how they're managing their portfolio, or what decisions they're making that keep them in the game or take them out of the game. And so, he called me up basically to say, all of my other investments over the course of the recession have tanked, and I need the money. And based on our deal, I'm entitled to what you have in the bank, and I'm going to take it. And so I said to him, I was like, look, if this is the case, we're the only ones making money, you should leave your cash in. And he's like, I understand what you're saying, but this is really just a courtesy call. And then he hung up, and a few minutes later, the cash was out of the account. And so I couldn't, basically put us all the way back to day one, and I couldn't make that journey again that way. So we shut down the company and moved on.
How was that for you personally? Like I can imagine that this was a hard business wise, but this is for you something personal, like something that you set up and an investor pulls the rug out under your.
I couldn't blame the investor forever, because it was on me for decisions I'd made along the way. Like, I knew a deadline like that was coming, but again, I was still really young, and I still thought I knew everything. And it took this experience for me to understand that, like, there's certain things I can't control. There's certain things I don't know. And there's certain things you have to plan for. Like, you have to plan for a rainy day where you might not have any money. You might not have any revenue. You can't just stay in, like, super growth mode all the time, And so afterwards, I really, I didn't spend a lot of time blaming other people. I very quickly came to the conclusion that I done this to myself. And that was the hardest part to get through, was once I understood that I'd done this to myself, how to reconcile that and how to move forward and feel valuable again to entrepreneurship or to whatever it is I want to try to do with my life. So, and that took a little while.
And in hindsight, would you have done exactly the same still, or would you maybe like got a job and like tried to get some savings?
It's an interesting experience. I think in hindsight, I probably would have shut down the company earlier before I ran into zero like that. It's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of thing. It's like, I wouldn't be who I am today without that experience. Was it an ideal experience? Not all of it was terrible. Some of it was really exciting, and like I learned a lot, and I made some really good friends, and accomplished some really great work that I'm still very proud of. So, I can't just throw all of it away just because a portion of it was really difficult to deal with. I think, some of it's there for a reason. It's a learning lesson. And if you're the kind of person, especially entrepreneurs are like this, you're always striving for the next level. You just can't rest at right here or good enough. So if you're always striving for the next level and you're honest enough with yourself to hold yourself accountable, then these are just the stepping stones to where we're going,
Okay. You closed down the shop?
We closed down that shop. I was depressed for a while. It took a little while for me to start answering the phone again. And then by then in the US, the stimulus money had hit and people were getting back to work and all that. So we're climbing out of the recession. Startups were getting funded. There's this whole innovation district being, energized in downtown in the Seaport area. And I was getting phone calls from people being like, "Hey, we remember you," like, because we were very loud during the recession. Like, we were a very loud studio doing really big things and always punching above our weight. And people remembered that and remembered me from it. And so as soon as some of these people were getting their cash, they're like, "We need Amit to come help us get started and show us how to do this. And like, will you help us launch our startup? Will you help us rebuild this team that we had at this company? We need help brainstorming about how to execute this kind of stuff. Will you help us do that?" And that's kind of what I was in the middle of doing. And then about a year into that, I got a call from Cantor Fitzgerald through their Cantor Ventures group, and they had a project called delivery.com, which was at the time, very prevalent in New York as a food delivery platform. And they're like, "We want to expand this. We're doing well in the US, but we want to go international. And we've got a guy on the ground in Hong Kong, and we'd love for you to go out there and work with him and help him get started." And so the complexity to the situation was delivery.com in the US is now an enterprise company, and they're trying to launch a startup in another territory in Hong Kong, which is going to be resourced by Cantor Fitzgerald's office in Hong Kong. So it's a startup that you have to plug into a bank, that you have to plug into an enterprise e-commerce business. And so from the get-go, it's just very complicated on a bureaucratic level, on a business case level, and like how you're putting it together. So, and we were really, we had to be absolutely precise with everything we put forward. So we couldn't really do a lot of like loose documentation or like, just be like, "Oh, we're going to shoot from the hip on this one and we'll just see where that goes." Like, we're literally like, if we wanted to do something, we needed to sign off from 10 different people. So it made us very good at organizing resources and being good at planning, to move the execution forward. And so I came out here to do that job and, to Hong Kong, and, we launched that business, and it later got acquired. That division of it later got acquired by Foodpanda.
Yeah, that was about the first time that our paths crossed here in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I still remember I visited that office, and I think it was a windowless office, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a beautiful office.
It was a beautiful office. It was like
a
in
spa.
the center.
Yeah, we were at the center. It's actually my first foray into Hong Kong. I didn't understand why everyone was always complaining about apartments being really small and offices being kind of, dingy or whatever. I was like, really? Is this what people are complaining about? Because like, I arrived in Hong Kong, I was staying with my brother, and he was living in this really beautiful apartment that was very spacious, but he was in finance, and I wasn't catching that flag that he's in finance and he was spending a lot of money on that apartment. And I was, first job was at the center, and I was like, "Oh, this is what offices are like in Hong Kong. This is great." And so it wasn't until I left that job and went to another one, and now my brother has moved away and I'm living in my own apartment, and I realized like, oh, okay, this is what people are talking about.
That was indeed around the time that food delivery companies were starting up and failing and starting up again. Here in Hong Kong, you had Deliveroo, you had Food Panda, you had
there's
Coziness.
Cuisine Courier. Coziness was another one.
Delivery.com, of course.
Delivery.com. And then what was the other one? I can't remember, but there was one that we used to compete with all the time that was really funny. It'll come back to me. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that was a very exciting time. I actually, with everything that's going on these days with the virus and everything, and people are very dependent on food delivery now, in a very selfish way, I feel kind of responsible for saving the city, because like the work we did at Delivery.com is kind of what rallied that whole industry here. And a lot of the process and, infrastructure that we set up is still what's driving a lot of the way food delivery happens here. So I was ordering my food the other night and I was feeling like, you know what? I really did something here. I really had impact. But I'm overstating my value a lot when I say that. But yeah, no, we started Delivery.com. We got it up and running. We were one of the first aggregators like us. And then Food Panda wanted to give us a run for our money, so they started marketing very hard and pushing their platform really hard. And then Deliveroo saw what we were doing and they came to town. Food Panda tried to buy them out and then couldn't, and they ended up creating Foodora to compete with them. And then somebody at Rocket Internet which is the investor behind Food Panda, was like, these are basically the same business. Let's slam them back together. So Food Panda got a little bit bigger and they kept acquiring different aggregators and different delivery companies. The challenge for the business here in Hong Kong is that none of the merchants do delivery themselves. And so, in a place like North America where we're used to delivery and people have, the culture of delivery that they grow up with, like all of my friends, as soon as they got their license and had their first car, the first thing they did was go get a job delivering pizza for somebody, because it's a quick way to make cash over the summer and it's a good job that keeps you driving and all that stuff. So, we grow up that way, and like most local restaurants in the U.S. Deliver or have some capacity to deliver. In Hong Kong, that wasn't the case. So the aggregators, whose business generally was demand generation and like, bringing users to the door and bringing merchants to the door and facilitating the transaction, they then suddenly found themselves having to do the delivery themselves as well, which creates a whole other dynamic to it. And that's harder to scale, because instead of there being 100 deliveries managed from 100 different points, you have 100 deliveries managed from one point, one dispatch. And that's very hard. And so it makes it very difficult for that business to move in a certain way. So one of the things that we ended up having to do was start a separate logistics business to keep it separated from the e-commerce aggregation thing that we were doing. So we started this business called Runner, and that was fledgling startup, and we had basically services that we were running for Delivery.com and for other people that wanted to do delivery as well, and that was going very well. It's just that the those of us that were the founders of the company, we could see the opportunity, but none of us had the time to leave our jobs to go run it as a startup, so that ended up not going anywhere. But the logistics component was very key, and that's what drove that whole market. Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like you had the local restaurants, like the mom and pop shops. They, as my experience is, they usually delivered also, but then with their own staff. That was the little, like the guys that going around during lunchtime with the bags of the little plastic bags and then going to offices. How hard was it to onboard those kind of restaurants to say like, hey, like there will be, if somebody orders through our platform, there will be a guy coming to your restaurant to pick it up and then deliver it to the end customer?
Every restaurant we talked to loved that idea. They didn't want to do the delivery themselves. So if it was provided to them and it wasn't a cost they had to maintain in terms of like hiring somebody full time, they absolutely loved that idea. So that was very easy. The beginning part that was hard was we were trying to, in the beginning, convince the merchants to do the delivery themselves, which that took some work. So like, most of the merchants wouldn't want to do it unless it was an order of a certain size and they had a certain amount of advance warning. And that when we tried that in the beginning to do that, so like a minimum order size was rather high, and then the order had to be placed, at least, half a day in advance, if not a full day in advance. And what we found was it was very hard for people to order because people aren't hungry a day early. They're hungry now and they want their food now. So we were missing out on a lot of orders. So again, to meet that point or that threshold of we're actually capturing the demand, we had to somehow figure out how to get the deliveries done.
Those kind of things are still going on. Actually, just before this podcast, we were downstairs at a coffee shop that also sells bagels and food and that kind of thing. And
excellent donuts.
Excellent donuts. J Coffee, by the way, in Wan Chai. But what you saw there was, while I was sitting there waiting, that coffee shop sells food and serves food, but there were people coming in delivering from local restaurants for their actual staff of the coffee shop. So there were delivering people coming in, delivering the lunch at that point for the local staff of the coffee shop, because it's cheaper for the staff to get the lunch from a local restaurant than paying from their own salary for the lunch made by the restaurant they're actually working in.
Sure. And that's why those local restaurants destroy everybody else that is out here, because I actually used to observe this all the time on in Central. There'd be a string of local restaurants mixed in with some of the international guys that were coming in trying to touch down and compete with them, and the local guys always destroyed them because there was a price point there, there was a familiarity in the type of cuisine there, and it was food you could order. It's the same every day, no matter when you get it. And so it's a very repeatable, very easy to do kind of thing. And again, the price point was unbeatable. So they would have the volume. And literally my friend's shop would be, maybe 10 customers at a time. And the shop next to him that was the local place would have a line out the door around the corner, a couple blocks. So, even if there was you could say on a per unit basis, he was making more money. On a volume basis, he was way behind them. And that's why a lot of restaurants, I think, struggle out here in Hong Kong, is that, you have to figure out the localization aspect of it quickly. Part of that's a language issue, and then part of that's just kind of actually understanding what it is people want issue. So,
yeah, just to put things in perspective for the listeners. At one point, I had an intern working at my company, and as an exit interview, I was asking hey, can you name anything that you would try to see differently? And we weren't. I didn't have my office in a very upscale part of town, and then that intern said, yeah, if I really have to mention something, is that when I go out here for lunch, there's no lunch places less than 60 Hong Kong dollars. And that's in US dollars, $7-8 US. They are used to even paying less than that for their lunch. So that's just to put things in perspective, that going somewhere to pay less than $6 US is the standard for local people for their lunch.
Exactly.
So delivery.com here at least the Hong Kong here. Part got acquired. What's next for you?
So I left there and ended up starting a consulting company, and the first client we took on board was an e-commerce wine company that was at the time somewhat in distress. Part of the issue was it was almost like a spy novel. There were executive management there that were stealing from the company and things like that. And operationally, it had grown beyond the actual business it was doing, so it was very bloated, and they were highly in debt to a lot of their vendors and distributors. So we went in, and by we I mean by then I had some friends I'd met, so they were my co-founders in this consulting business. And we went in and we helped them reshape the company and, resize it or, right size it. And then we got rid of some of the negative elements, people that were actively doing damage to the company, things like that. And we also did a digital transformation for them where, we managed to get all their stock in a warehouse into another third-party provider that had basically cloud services that you could manage the inventory from. And they also did deliveries. So all of a sudden we turned this semi-brick and mortar e-commerce wine shop into a fully cloud-based operation, and managed to get them back up and running and set them back out to do what they needed to do. So that was a great victory for us that way. I learned a lot about the social dynamics of companies that have those kinds of problems. People that feel that they've been there for a while and that they're owed something or entitled to something. People that feel like they can just take whatever they need to take. People who are trying to do what they can do and just trying to survive, and they're just used to being taken advantage of, and just kind of get used to turning a blind eye to being taken advantage of, and all that stuff, and also the effects of how cash flow issues can affect the team and team morale, and some things you don't get back. Like when certain people hit a certain threshold of like they feel that they've been messed around with too much, you never get that person back on an ideological basis. And so kind of getting to see that all up close and personal was quite an education.
But by now you're quite detached or far away from everything gaming, far away from virtualization.
Yeah.
And then something else came on your path, right?
What happened was I was interviewing for a job with a big broadcaster, let's say, and they were looking for a head of digital. And I made it through all the rounds of interviews, and I was one of several hundred candidates that they were looking at, and I made it down to the last two. It was me and one other person. And during the whole time I was interviewing for this job, my whole sporadic and very diverse background made sense. Like I felt like everything I'd done had purpose and was in a straight line and like added up to what this job was going to be. And then I didn't get the job, and I was like, oh, what does that mean? And so I sat and I thought about it for a while, and I was like, well, if that's the kind of work I want to be doing, I need to start doing that kind of work. And that was really it. And as simple as that sounds, I had to actually understand that that's what I needed to do. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to cut out everything that's not that kind of work. And so at the time, we'd been doing some consulting work with listed companies in Hong Kong and helping them do like digital transformation and fundraising and things like that. And I was like, nope, this is not the work I want to be doing. I want to be doing specifically creative and tech work, like new stuff that nobody's done before, working with a really creative team and pushing the boundaries of where we can go with all these things, not just on an entertainment basis, but also for productivity and for everything. And so I dropped everything, found some investors, and started this company called Shadow Factory. And the focus was VR because I'd been playing around with it in the background and was already inspired by it and wanted to learn more about it and try it out. And I'd been to a conference in Bali where all the senior media professionals go. It's run by Media Partners Asia. It's called APOS. And they had a big track on VR that year. And everybody was saying the same thing. They're like, oh, we love VR, but we don't really understand it. We like VR. It's an interesting tool or concept, but we're not sure how it's going to work. And I was really surprised by that because for me, it was kind of obvious how it could work. And I was surprised that other people hadn't caught on to it. And I remember walking around the conference talking to people, and I talked to some of the guys and these are all names you would recognize. So like, we're talking like the likes of Fox or Discovery or, Vice or, MTV or any of those guys. Right. And I remember walking around and like asking them like, why are you struggling with VR? Like, what is the challenge for you? And what became apparent to me was that VR and its execution requires expertise in three main areas. One is creative, one is tech, and then one is, the solutions aspect of it. So on the creative side, you need to be very good at the kind of creative that you would do for storytelling in like television or film. You also need to be very good at the kind of creative you would do for video games. And that's already several separate disciplines. On the tech side, you need to be very good at IT systems, different devices, so desktop, console, tablet, video game consoles. And then also you need to be good at like cloud and cloud security. We had one client where we launched a project for them and it was super high profile and the press were on the way. And because it was so high profile and they'd been advertising it, some hackers decided to see if they could stop the event, and they had a denial of service attack, which would have shut down the entire event because it was all going to run off of this one service that they were depending on. And not only did we have to provide the AR, VR component of the event, we had to jump in at the last minute and provide the cybersecurity and patch up the server and get them back up and running. And we had them back up and running a half an hour before the press arrived. And so, you need to be able to have the ability to service all of these different areas all in one go. And then the solutions part is the most crucial. How do you solution this to a company? How do you actually derive value from this? How is this actually going to be used by the end customer? And what do we really need to build here? So all three of those things you need to be able to do at once in the process of executing high quality VR and AR solutions. And what I realized walking around this conference was those are all separate disciplines, and usually people are used to working in silos. Like, I'm the content guy, I stick to content. I'm the tech guy, I stick to tech. I'm the solutions guy, so I'm just going to manage the vendors. I don't actually have any expertise in house. And so I realized like that approach is going to make it very difficult for people to operate and adopt these technologies. And that we had, just by nature of my background and the kind of work we'd been doing, we had a real shot at helping these people with this stuff. And so I came back from the conference, we dropped everything, and we started Shadow Factory.
That was easy, right?
Oh, yeah. Took 2 seconds, We're a unicorn? No. It was very difficult. One, nobody knew what VR was. We were still trying to educate people on it. Like, people had heard about it, but they hadn't even put on a headset. They hadn't really seen any experiences, and they didn't really know what the technology could do. And to be honest, we didn't really know what the technology could do. We knew what we could do with it, but we didn't really know what the boundaries were there, and what we're going to run into. So, within, a good 6 months or so, we'd managed to get up and running and get started.
How long between starting and first revenue? Because this is like, VR is like a lot of things,
so if you can
development.
If you can call our first project revenue, because it was a very, very low price point, but I think it took us like...
I'm talking about revenue, not profit.
Yeah. So even then, I'm not sure it counts. I think we probably were like 9-10 months in before we actually saw any money.
When was the point that because it's always very insecure, right? You're doing something like this. What was the point that you thought with yourself, like, this is it? This is going to be the thing that I'm going to work on the next 10, 15 years. And how much did you give yourself from the start until that point upfront? Like, usually when you start something, you say, like, I will give this 6 months, I'll give this 18 months, I'll give this 3 years. And if I'm not at that milestone, then at that point I'll stop. Like what were your KPIs there?
I don't really approach entrepreneurship that way. I don't know if you ever saw that movie Gattaca. The movie Gattaca. There's a scene where these two brothers have this competition. There's a lot more to the movie, but the particular scene I'm referring to is there's these two brothers that have this competition to see who can swim the farthest before turning back. And the older brother always wins. It's always been that way since they were kids, and the younger brother's always like, I could never beat him. And then finally, at the middle of this movie, they met up again after many years of being estranged, and obviously there's some tension between them. I'm trying not to spoil the movie, but in order to settle it, they decide to go for the swim again and compete. And they keep swimming and they keep swimming and they keep swimming. And the older brother's like, hey, we've gone pretty far. You probably want to turn back now. And he's like, no, I'm going to keep going. And and they end up swimming and swimming and swimming. The older brother eventually like almost like collapses, like he starts to sink, and oh, that's okay. He starts to sink and almost drown, and then the younger brother grabs him, saves him, brings him back to the shore. And the older brother's like totally like, he's like, this should be impossible. Like, how did you do that? And the younger brother's like, I never left anything for the way back. And the way that I do startups is like that. Like, if you're aiming at like a milestone of like, okay, well, in 3 months I'm going to be done or not, probably you're going to end up being done. And you'll create circumstances for it to be finished. Because the thing is, especially with something like VR, where it's like such a cutting edge industry, and there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of things you're going to have to wait out. There's always going to be a reason to stop and shut down the company. So for me, it was like I was really inspired that, one, we built a really great world-class team, and two, we were doing excellent work. Or we are doing excellent work. So whatever our challenges have been over the years, we're coming up on our 4th year now. This May is our 4th anniversary. Whatever our challenges have been, I'm really proud of what we've done and the team that we have together. And I can't turn back. This is where I'm going to go, one way or the other.
No. Smooth sailing so far, or?
Oh, no way. What can I say? Like, there's really good days and there's really bad days. I talk about this at some of the startup mentoring that we do. On a good day for a startup, it's really easy to be happy. There's no problems. It's great. On the bad days, you feel like total garbage. Like, you're sitting there, all your personal demons are right beside you, and they're just being like, yeah, of course you're stupid. Of course you can't do this. What were you thinking? This is an awful idea. So the bad days are really tough, and you have to keep in mind what it is you're trying to do. Hopefully you've got great people around you that can help you just kind of process it, and people you can vent to. Hopefully you've got, healthy outlets to channel that energy into. Whenever I have like a really, really bad day or week or something like that, I actually try to make it to like a jiu-jitsu class and just kind of let it all out and all that. I smoke a lot of cigars, so that's one way of getting them out too. But it hasn't been totally smooth sailing. But our opportunity is still there, and the team's still together, and we're still doing the best work we've ever done. So,
can you talk a little bit about like the challenges that you have like in the last period, also especially the last few months with the COVID?
Sure. So last year we were having some issues because we were chasing some funding that didn't come through, and at the time we were in super growth mode, and so that created some cash flow issues for us, which was challenging. And then the protests started. So as the protests started, our ability to forecast any kind of recovery plan or drive opportunities that could help us with the recovery, everything just got murkier and murkier and harder to manage. So we went through a lot of difficulty trying to understand, like, how do we get through to the next day? What does our tomorrow look like? And so in the process of that, we've had to do a few things. We had to, look at the team differently, look at the kind of work that we were chasing differently, who was on the team, that kind of stuff. And now we've totally transformed the company into a very different thing from what it was last year, in terms of we're much leaner, but also we're much more automated. We're doing the same kind of projects. It's just taking a longer time to close them because with the protests and now the virus, it's very hard to get a hold of clients. It's very hard to get them to commit to the projects that we need them to commit to and to kind of get things over the line. So there's still a lot of interest in what we're doing and all that, and there's still an industry for us. It's just everything's slowed down and access to everything is much harder. So we've had to become double and triple as aggressive to chase it down and get over there. The other thing to say about what the flip side of it has been is that with the virus and everybody having to stay home, the demand for VR and immersive technology has shot through the roof. Like we're getting 4 or 5 leads a week now, people calling us trying to get help with, hey, can you help us do this in VR? We can't do it in person anymore. And that goes from the range of like things in education to corporate productivity, so like meetings, conferences, that sort of thing, all the way to massive, large-scale VR events, so something like a music concert or something like that, trade shows.
And so far, any regrets?
I think there's always regrets. No, I'm not going to talk about them today.
Maybe
yes.
for another
for another podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quite often, you get advice as
I will say I don't regret sticking with it.
Okay. Quite often, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you get advice from other people. What is a piece of advice that often goes around, or you got that you don't agree with?
So, I really feel that there's this whole paradigm of startup culture that's influenced by investors that are looking to replicate the Facebook thing, and I say that quote unquote, the Facebook thing. There's a lot of investors that we've spoken to since we started, who are just like, not, purposely not understanding our business model or like what we're trying to do. Like our business model is we want to make money, and I'm not going to raise cash or ask anyone for cash that I don't think I can reasonably pay back through revenues in a reasonable amount of time. Every investor we talked to the first year thought that was a bad idea. They're like, well, you shouldn't be making revenue right now. You should be working on customer acquisition and like building your ecosystem. And I'm like, well, in the beginning, we were a services company. We didn't have any products like that. And we were still trying to build out the marketplace and still trying to understand things. So the concept of what you're trying to apply to us doesn't apply to us. We're in a different model. And you guys, if you want to take advantage of these opportunities, you need to figure out a different model to look at. And so that was something that I had to figure out quickly, was like, we need to be approaching this differently than we're being advised to, because if I'd followed any of that advice in the first place, we wouldn't have made it past the first year. We would have taken big swings at things like, making a game and hoping that it would be a hit in VR, and there's just no way that would have worked. The economics are not there for it. We could have taken big swings at like building a platform but with no market validation. Every company that's been a VR funding company that's tried to do that has failed. The thing that we do that's different from the other ones is that because we were mostly bootstrapped from the beginning, and the only reason we're still here is because clients pay us money to do stuff. That means we get the market validation up front, and then we start building. So we're building stuff that people actually need, and we're building it so they can actually use it. That's the biggest difference in our approach versus some of the other guys that are out there. Some of the other guys that are out there are like, oh, well, we built this thing in VR, now you go use it. And the client will pick it up and be like, well, we don't really understand how this works anyway. I don't know how to use this. So that idea of stay away from revenue or, try to be more like Facebook is something that I think it just doesn't apply to us. And I think, we had to come up with our own game plan and our own playbook as a necessity of that.
And what's the most valuable advice that's ever given to you?
I remember, there's days when you're really not sure what's going on and everything seems like it's upside down. And a good friend of mine told me once, like, when that happens, you need to sit down, empty your mind, and ask yourself some questions, some soul-searching questions about what it is you're doing and who you want to be, and don't be afraid of the answers. And, particularly over the last years, we've had our various challenges. I've had a few of those moments where I've had to sit down and ask myself, who am I going to be and what am I doing? And it is kind of scary to sit there and not know what the answer is going to be. But, once you come around to it, the amount of confidence you feel and the amount of resolve that you feel around it is really, very empowering.
And what's something that is not a secret, but not a lot of people know about you?
I have a black belt in Shotokan karate.
A black belt. All right.
It's a long time ago. Yeah.
If there's one thing you want people to take away from this talk that we just had, this podcast, what is it?
I think, entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. And, if you meet me in person or if I do startup mentoring, I'll say the same thing. Like, if you think this is a cool thing to do and it's really easy and like you're going to make money and you can already see the IPO, that's not what this is about. This is about really testing yourself and really the world testing you about what it is that you want to do and who you want to be. The only reason you should be in this game is if you can't sleep at night because you can't do this thing or this thing's not real in the world yet. I need to do this kind of work. I need to be involved in like really creative, really technical projects. I need to work with really smart, really creative people. This job that I've built for myself is my dream job, and I can't breathe without it. And I would encourage you, if you've got something like that in your life where like you just can't live without it, then yeah, this is for you.
I want to thank you for your valuable insights and sharing your lessons learned in startups.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
For the listeners, although the rating system of podcasts is hideous, if you like this Mea Culpa series, you can rate this podcast with 5 stars as a motivation for the makers. This is Jeffrey Brewer. Normally I would say go out and build something meaningful, but in these days I say stay inside and still build something meaningful. Thank you.